placement, your career advising, it's forever. They have kids that haven't been on campus for 20 years who find themselves between careers or out of a job. They go back in and just start setting them up, lighting up their whole network. Who did you go to school with? Who else was in your major? Da 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 da.
Well, I know a couple of years ago they started a program with Notre Dame High School that maintained a B average. We did a real big discount to go to State Art University. Now that's automatic now.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's good for the kids here too. So.
Yeah, they got their housing deposit that come out to just move that from the town to State Art. Those incoming.
Well, no, even for like, I think for 500 housing
Yep.
deposit for next year is due end of this month or
Yep.
February 15th.
Yep. And I saw some parents for aggravated, why you're paying $500 now?
That's right. You want your key to stay activated, you wanna get your housing lottery number for next year,
Yep.
you better ante up now.
Yep. Yep. No. RA. RN.
Yeah.
In medical.
That was where Mike was in our last meeting. So
Oh,
it's just,
okay.
Hey, how's it going?
Good to see you, Brian. Thanks for joining us.
yeah, of course.
You going to the chili cook-off at VFW?
Okay, Sunday.
What's up, Mike?
How are you?
Good to see you.
Jill, how are you? Speaking of Billy, how are you?
Were your ears ringing last night? I was asking about you.
Uh-oh, no, go ahead.
I was asking you how you doing.
It's great to see you. But last time I saw you, and we talked
better.
about your football team.
Lost a lot of weight.
Press.
75 pounds.
You take some of mine?
We're not going there.
I'm still on the diet. I lost 75 so far.
We're not gonna be friends.
Yeah.
Yeah, think about it. If Tony Romo's still playing, it's
Special
just
guy?
No, I
Alan?
cut out all the carbs.
Shut your trap, dude.
I go to the gym 3 days a week.
Wow.
I'm retired, so I got time to do that now, so it's good. I'm doing real good.
Like one season in the NFC, then one playoff.
At least your team's out, too.
Romo and
I mean, I'm a Cowboys fan, nothing's nice.
All right, you guys, everybody ready? Alright, so we're gonna call this meeting to order at 6:35 p.m. We have a quorum. Before we get started, I'd like to just go around the room and we can start with you, just introduce yourself and
Peter Carroll.
if you wanna say anything, but
Hi, I'm Jill D'Angelo Powers, newly elected to the Board of Education.
I'm Heather Borges, I'm the acting superintendent.
And I'm Pamela Jean, I'm the chief operating officer.
Richard Joe, Board of Ed, so. Brian Massler, custodian at
Alan Llewellyn, 6-year member of the Planning Committee, 10 years on building needs, and current town council.
Bill O'Brien, everybody knows me.
Mike Henrik, board member, chair of this committee.
Dr. Prentice Palmer, happy little Martian.
Alright. And then, come on in. Rich, you might wanna grab us one of these side seats, cause I'm guessing by the screen, the presentation will be over there.
Here, I can move up there.
No, you stay, stay.
We got a
We'll
seat
have-
here,
we'll have some
Richard, here or
questions.
there.
You can have that seat right there.
I'm gonna use this one.
And we just went through introductions, so you're not gonna know who everybody is, but why don't you tell us who you are?
Rich Fredette.
All right, need acceptance of the minutes from the November 2nd, 2023 meeting.
So moved, Mr.
Moved
Chairman.
by Mr. Llewellyn,
Second.
second by Mr. O'Brien. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed unanimously. All right, we're gonna jump right into, well, we have okay, redistricting study survey results. Just so you guys know, in front of you have a graph, colored graph. A couple of years back, we had asked to do a survey of all staff members, K through 8, as to what their thought process was, and the question it was a little more involved the last one, but SLAM had asked for some information and some guidance as to where we wanted to go. One of those key components to it was, do we want to maintain the current structure K through 6? Do we want to move, whatever kind of models do we want to have? Stratford is one of, I think, 5 districts in the state who do a K through 6 model. When we were here, Pete, you remember, we had some staff members come in and talk about the complications or lack of complications to move teachers from K to 5, K to 6 to 6 to 8, whether it could be done. Anyway, the question we had asked was for the purposes of fostering the optimal educational and social emotional environment for 6th graders and surrounding grades, which model do you believe is the most effective? Choose one below. K through 6, 7 and 8, K through 5, 6 and 8, or no opinion. 73% of the staff who were asked in the K through 8 schools said that they believed that K through 5 and 6 through 8 was the best model. So 73%. So it just gives us some guidance as to where maybe when we had asked the question a while back, it was if we came back from the staff and the staff said no, it's fine the way it is, then we kill the idea right there. But based on this, 73% is a pretty significant number. I think the next steps, and hopefully SLAM can guide us a little bit with this, is can we do it? And then if we decide, it should be done, the staff, like I has given us some indication that they think it's a better model. They work with these kids every day. Next step is, can we do it? And then the next step is how do we do it? And bringing the public in at that point. But I think it's incremental steps, and we talked about, taking those steps a few years back. I think this is just based on the information that SLAM was requesting. I wanted to get this information to you guys so we can at least have some background on it. So that's where that is. So there were 73% were in favor of it, 22 were in favor of the K through 6, 7, and 8, and 4.1% had no opinion. And again, that went out to all employees who worked in schools K through 8. So it's pretty significant numbers. Next on the agenda is SLAM's presentation. Are they, Ms. Borges, are they ready?
I'm guessing they're here and ready. Let's see. Pat, are you ready for us?
You're on mute, so.
Yep, I'm in this. Pat, are you ready for us? No. Wonderful. Okay, we are ready for you to present. Can you turn the volume up a little?
Good evening, everybody. Pat Gallagher with the SLAM Collaborative. Thanks for having me back. I just wanted to give an update on the first phase of our work, which we conduct enrollment projections and a capacity utilization study. This is really the first step before you contemplate any changes to your attendance zone. We need to understand what enrollment trends are looking like over the next 10 years, and then we have to understand if there's any facilities that may have space or may be lacking space. So that's the
Hey, Pat?
Yeah.
Before you jump in, we've got a lot of new members here. Can you kind of just give us a brief synopsis of the process from the start?
Sure. So we started this process back in the fall, contracted by the district to do a redistricting study, focusing on your elementary attendance zones. And so we really developed a two-stage process, or two-phase process. Phase 1 of our work is for us to really understand existing conditions, so understanding enrollment trends, understanding building capacity, how many seats are available in particular buildings, how efficiently our buildings used, and then that's going to lead to some takeaways that then inform our redistricting process, which is phase 2 of our work. And so in phase 2, we'll be running through different redistricting scenarios based on some criteria and guidance we get from the board, ultimately give you guys some pros and cons for different approaches that could be implemented to meet those goals. Does that help?
Does everybody understand where we're at? Yeah. Okay. Yep.
All right, excellent. So I have a decent amount of content to cover, but I'll try to be efficient and save some time for Q&A. So the first part of our work is our enrollment projections, and we always start with understanding what we call enrollment drivers. So these are the underlying trends within the community that are shaping what you're seeing in your school system from an enrollment side. So we take a look at community demographics. Stratford has been a fairly stable town population-wise since the 1970s. However, over the last decade between the 2010 and 2020 census, you did see some modest growth, adding about 1,000 new residents, about 2% growth. You're a largely built-out community, and so that limits opportunities for new development on vacant land. And what we've seen is that there's a growing trend towards infill development and redevelopment in some of your more established neighborhoods. So that impacts particular school districts more than others. We looked at community age structure, and like most communities, you are seeing an aging population and a growing senior population. However, we've also seen an influx of young families between 2010 and 2020, families that are most likely to have school-age children in tow. Births are also a key demographic indicator that we look at. It's a good indicator of your future kindergarten classes. And after a period of decline throughout the late 2000s, early 2010s, births have stabilized, and I apologize, that should say 480, not 180, and have stabilized over the last 6 years or so. And so we anticipate that'll lead to more stable kindergarten classes. The other enrollment driver is your housing market. So really the two ways your enrollment changes are demographics, notably births. If births go down, kindergarten classes tend to be smaller, enrollment tends to be smaller over time as that class matriculates through the system. And vice versa, if you have a large increase in births or larger birth cohorts. The other way that your enrollment can change in any given year is through housing, and that's really the driver of migration in your community. So we look at new housing, we look at turnover of existing housing, and try to tie that back to some of the trends that we're seeing in your student population. As I mentioned earlier, you are a largely built-out community, but you still have a modest pace of new housing development. So you've averaged about 40 new housing units per year over the last 10 years, and about 2/3 of that are multifamily, compared to prior to the Great Recession when it was primarily single-family homes. We also coordinated with your planning department to understand any projects that may not be built yet but are in the pipeline through the land use approval process. We have over 500 units in that process, and most of those are in the Johnson House attendance. When we're looking at especially multifamily development, the impacts to the school system are largely dependent on the type of project that's moving forward. So a single family development will tend to have fewer number of units, but will tend to produce a higher number of students in each unit. Comparatively, apartments, while we may see a larger number of units, they tend to produce fewer students per unit. And that's especially true for studio and one-bedroom apartments, which produce very few students. And then we see higher numbers of students for developments that have 2- and 3-bedroom apartments. We also tracked home sales. You saw a period of elevated home sales between 2016 and 2021. Like many communities in Fairfield County, you experienced a increase in sale activity during the pandemic, reaching almost Great Recession or pre-Great Recession peak levels. But we've seen sales decline, and this is not just a Stratford trend, this is a trend we're seeing across the state, particularly in 2023, and that's driven more by national trends that we're seeing around high interest rates and the like. So overall, Stratford's enrollment has been on a declining trend, and it last peaked in 2007 at 7,440 students. We saw the greatest decrease between 2007 and the 2015-16 school year, where we saw about a 7% decrease. And over the last 10 years or so, the rate of decrease has somewhat stabilized and minimized. And so enrollment's been generally stable with some slight declines since 2015. and this school year at 6,740 students, which is slightly above where you were back in 2020, where many districts saw some smaller enrollments due to COVID. Looking at our elementary grades are always the leading end of any trend. So they're the first cohort that typically will grow, and then that growth eventually makes its way through the middle of high school. Similarly, they're usually the first cohort to decline. So if your elementary school enrollment declines, that decline will then be felt in the middle school and in high school, delayed a few years as those students matriculate out. But largely, the elementary enrollment has been on a decreasing trend. The last peak was at just under 3,800 students back in the 2007-2008 school year. And we've had a decline reaching just over 3,200 K-6 students this year. And typically we'll do a school-based analysis, but given your recent changes to your attendance zones, where special programs are located, and even grade configurations in some cases, we couldn't rely on just looking at enrollment by school. And so we leveraged our geographic information systems, enrollment management database. So essentially what that lets us do is map your student addresses so that we can understand patterns at a neighborhood level. So this map here shows your K-6 student distribution as of October 1st of this year. Everything is color-coded based on attendance zone and school attended. And generally, what we can see is that most of your schools are neighborhood-based. So the base color of the attendance zone, so for example, Chapel here, it's the green attendance zone. Most of the students who are attending Chapel live in the Chapel attendance zone. But there are a few exceptions. So we obviously have our dual language program at Second Hill Lane, which captures students throughout the district. And so we see a smattering of these blue dots located throughout Stratford. But other schools also have some challenges, and I'll get into that as we get into the capacity study, and Lordship being probably the best example. While technically it's a neighborhood school, it functions more like a school of choice. Less than half of the students who attend Lordship live within the Lordship attendance zone, and more than half of the students live outside. And most of the students that live outside live in the Johnson House attendance zone. Another exception to the neighborhood-based system is we do have a small satellite zone that is sent to Chapel. That's right on the west side of the district near Franklin. So that makes up about 13% of the total Chapel student body. And then in addition to our special programs at Second Hill Lane and our placements into Lordship, we also have placements into other school buildings. So students are placed into other buildings outside of their attendance zone. And that's, I think, largely an administrative policy meant to, efficiently staff buildings. If you have a grade at a tipping point and a new student moves in mid-year, often they'll be moved to a school that'll have space and prevent you from having to create a new classroom mid-year. And as we'll see when we get into the capacity study, when we have buildings that are operating close to their capacity, it tends to increase the amount of administrative placements over time, and where we slowly start to move away from that neighborhood-based system that we're striving towards. We are also able to map enrollment change by neighborhood. So we carved up your elementary attendance zones into smaller blocks, what we're calling planning blocks, and that lets us track whether a particular neighborhood is growing or shrinking. So the colors in green on this map indicate neighborhoods that have grown since 2019, so our last pre-COVID year. Excuse me. Our yellow neighborhoods decreased slightly, and our red neighborhoods saw a 10 or greater % decrease, with the dark red seeing a 25% or greater decrease. In general, the neighborhoods in northern Stratford, so north of I-95, we tended to see more growth compared to south of I-95, with a few exceptions where most neighborhoods saw decreasing elementary enrollment.
Hey Pat,
This also, yeah.
can you click high slide on that Google ribbon that's on your screen?
Sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That also let us evaluate student demographics by neighborhood. So this map here lets us visualize percent minority students by planning block. The green colors having the highest percentage minority students, so the dark green being 85% or more for that neighborhood, light green being 75 to 84%. And then the other end, our purple neighborhoods are neighborhoods with the lowest share of minority students. And so you can see, clear patterns aligning with your attendance zones where, the areas with the greatest minority student populations are in the Johnson House, Franklin, and Nichols attendance zones, and the attendance zones with the smallest minority student populations are Lordship, Wilcoxon, and a little bit, to a lesser extent, Eli Whitney and Chapel here. The administrative placements that do happen help equalize this a little bit. And so when we actually look at your racial balance by school, that reflects where the students attend, not where they live necessarily. Your schools have a range of about plus or minus 20%. Whereas individual neighborhoods have a much greater range. We have a range of about 70% from the highest to the lowest neighborhood. So we have Wilcoxon, which has the lowest minority student percentage at about 20%. And then we have two schools on the upper end, Johnson House and Franklin, that are approaching 15% higher than the district-wide average, which as of this year, our unofficial numbers, since we don't have the state report yet, district-wide, we are calculating about just under 75% minority students as a district for grades K through 6. Getting into our middle school trends, middle school's been a little bit more variable. We've had some peaks and valleys. Our last middle school peak was in 2008, so lagged a little bit from our elementary peak at just under 1,200 students. And we saw a few years of declining enrollment, but then saw a slight uptick. And what we've seen is over the last 4 years or so, we've seen a declining trend continue. And so as of this school year, we're at 1,044 students, which is the lowest in recent memory. We did the same exercise, looking at middle school enrollment, really to get a sense of outplacements. And what we tend to see is over time, Worcester has grown to be the larger of the two middle schools. Historically, Flood was the larger of the two middle schools. It's also a physically larger building. But starting in about 2019, Worcester overtook it. And based on the current attendance zones, it's largely driven by your elementary districts. So our middle schools feed directly from our elementary districts, and based on where the elementary districts currently are drawn, we have about 55% of middle school students in the Worcester attendance zone and about 45% in the Flood attendance zone. And so we see some blue dots here on the map showing that there are some outplacements into Flood for students who live in the Worcester attendance zone. High school has been on a little bit different of a trajectory than the other grades. We saw a peak back in 2006 at 2,400 students, and saw a period of relative stability. And after reaching a low in 2016-17, enrollment at the high school level has started to rebound, so reaching about 2,300 students over the last 2 years. There's a couple of drivers here that we see. One is districts have expanded their 18 to 22 programs to meet new state requirements. So those students are technically classified as high school enrollments. So that number, the number of students in 12th grade has consistently grown over the last few years. And then also we tend to see upticks in enrollment for districts that complete building projects. So I certainly think that the building project at Stratford High may have made it more attractive for certain families to move into the community. When we look at our attendance at the high school level, we see a similar trend to the middle school, where historically Bunnell was the larger of the two high schools, and Stratford High School being smaller, but that flipped starting in about 2019-20. And we see a greater level of administrative placements at the high school level. We can see here a lot of these green dots residing in the Stratford High School attendance zone, but are shifted to Bunnell. Again, that largely reflects your attendance zones today. So we have about, again, slightly more than 55% of your student population lives in the Stratford High School attendance zone, a little less than 45% in the Vanilla High School attendance zone, and so that's what's driving that, that gap in enrollment between the two buildings. Getting into our projections, we prepare a high, medium, and low scenario to just represent the range of possible outcomes, knowing that we don't have a crystal ball and things happen at the macro level that are impossible for us to predict. Will we have a recession? Will there be a period of accelerated growth? So having the different models helps us look at different what-ifs and use that as part of our planning process. We always recommend using the medium model, which best reflects our long-term community trends. And so looking at our medium projection model, we are projecting some modest declines over the next 5 years, and then enrollment largely stabilizing over the last 5 years of the projection is at between 6,300 and 6,400 students. But we do see some differing trends by grade group. Elementary enrollment is projected to decrease slightly, so today we're at about 3,200. That's projected to decrease by just under 100 students through 2029-30, and then rebound to just about current levels by 2033-34. Middle school enrollment is projected to be relatively stable at just under current levels, so ranging from about 955 to just under 1,050 students. And most of that decrease that we're seeing district-wide is going to be felt at the high school level, where we're expected to decrease by about 300 students over the next decade, and that's largely due to some smaller classes that we currently have in the elementary and middle schools. Enrollment will decrease as those smaller cohorts move in and replace larger classes that graduate 4th grade. We prepared by school and by grade projections for the 10-year horizon. And so while overall elementary enrollment is projected to stay stable, we do have different trends by school. We're anticipating Lordship to see the greatest decrease at about 20%, with some smaller decreases at Eli Whitney and Nichols. Johnson House, Franklin, and Wilcoxon are projected to increase moderately, and then Chapel and Second Hill Lane are projected to stay relatively stable. And given the impact of administrative placements and where your programs are offered at particular buildings, that does impact these particular projections. And so a lot is kind of predicated on whether or not you continue doing what you're doing or whether you make some changes to that. And the state categorizes your special program enrollment separately. And so you will notice on our charts, we have what's called SPS special programs, which is our STEPS, ABA, and PDLC programs, which are held constant at current levels. And that's something we can't forecast just given the small sample size, so it's just an assumption that we carry forward. Similarly, we prepared projections for the middle school by school. So again, we're anticipating that the booster population will be larger than the flood population, just given the geography of where the students live. Both schools are anticipated to follow similar trends with slight decreases in the near term, and then enrollment largely stabilizing. And again, our special program enrollment is categorized separately. Both programs are currently at flood, and we are anticipating those remaining at current levels. And then finally, high school, as I mentioned earlier, the trends we saw with just the geographic distribution of students is anticipated to continue. So Stratford High School will continue to be the larger of the two high schools, and we're actually anticipating Vanilla to decrease by about 16% over the next 5 years before rebounding slightly, and then decreasing again in the later years. And then Stratford High School projected to decrease by about 2%, with the rate of decrease accelerating. And so again, this is dependent on your administrative policies as well. If you continue to send students who reside in Stratford High to Vanell, that may help equalize it to some extent. So part 2 of our work is our capacity and utilization study. I like to always start with this slide because I think it speaks to the impact that your educational program has on capacity So capacity is not a static number that never changes over time. Capacity of a building is going to change as your educational program changes. And some of our architects put together this diagram, which I think speaks well to how your district has changed over the years, especially a district with mostly older buildings. So, you know, back in the 60s, when some of your facilities were built or modified, almost all the spaces were used as instructional rooms. And over time, as your support staff increase and you start offering additional programs, your art, your music, STEM, all of that takes up space. And so over time, you know, a building that may have opened with 500 students sees its capacity cut in half simply because of the number of support services that it has to provide. And so our goal was to really identify the capacity of your building as of this school year that reflects your educational program and how you educate the students. It was a multi-step process, so we worked with the administration and building principals to get floor plans, room assignments, and schedules, and then color-coded that based on use, had some working meetings with the administration, and then supplemented that with questionnaires to building principals, and then field verification that we did over the last few weeks just to verify any questions that we had. So getting into our elementary schools, this is what I'm calling our elementary space program. So these are the services that that all of your buildings will provide. One of the challenges in Stratford is that you have buildings of varying sizes, you know, from tiny lordship all the way up to very large Second Hill Lane, and so you have a lot of creativity that your principals have to go through to make sure that each building can fit all of these support services, especially the smaller buildings where you're really having to use space as efficiently as possible. We also know that your support services and both the need and the number of staff have increased in recent years. So that was evident in our walkthroughs, is that a lot of those support staff need small spaces, and those aren't spaces that a lot of your older vintage buildings have readily available. And so, different principals took different approaches. Some buildings had the luxury of using some full-size classrooms for some of those support services. Others had to convert, storage rooms into small offices for staff to see students. So, a lot of variability from building to building simply by the size. But highlighted in blue are the uses that typically will need full-size classrooms. And again, a lot of that is dependent on, for the specials and special education, the number of rooms and the physical size of rooms is going to be dependent on availability of spaces in the building and enrollment. So in some cases, smaller spaces may be sufficient for special education if it's a smaller building, and similarly, in a small school like Lordship, art and music share a space just simply due to the scheduling. We also have district-wide special programs that we need to take into account for our capacity study. So we have 3 classrooms at STEPS for chapel, 3 classrooms for the STEPS program at Chapel. We also have 2 full-size rooms that are currently used as support services for that program. We have a PBLC room at Eli Whitney, ABA classrooms at Franklin, Lordship, and Second Hill Lanes, 7 total. The SPARK program at Eli Whitney is a program where we're reserving a space. I believe it's currently it's not staffed currently, but it's a program that could start up this year. And then finally, Parents Place, a little bit different than the other programs in that it's a non-academic program, but that uses 4 classrooms at Johnson House, and that was reflected in our capacity as well. So our walkthroughs and floor plan exercise really focused on full-size classrooms, so classrooms that could be used for instructional use. So we tallied the total number of full-size classrooms, those that were used for instructional purposes, so that's just general K-6 instruction. We looked at our specials, our art and our music. We looked at our various support services, so resource, math, and reading interventionists, OT-PT, other, which some buildings had just based on availability of space. So that's, could be a counselor or a school psychologist. And then district-wide programs are the ones that I captured on the previous slide. So when we're determining capacity of elementary schools, it's fairly straightforward since the students are homeroom, they're in their K-6 classroom, they're not rotating on a schedule through a team like middle school students. So for K-6, we used a loading level of 5 students per classroom, which is an average for of your contract maximums for K2 and K5. We understand that the dual language program at Second Hill Lane, their program target is 20 students per classroom, so that was the exception where we loaded those classrooms at 20 students as opposed to 25. Pre-K we loaded at 20 students per classroom at Victoria Soto, and then we reserved the space for the district-wide special programs based on where those programs are today. And so those classrooms were essentially deducted from the capacity, so we're making sure that we are providing space for those students. So for any neighborhood-based school system, we are never able to achieve our maximum class size just because there's always variability in your student population. Kids don't come neatly packed in groups of 25. And so we always apply an efficiency factor to account for that variation in enrollment from grade to grade. So we are using an efficiency factor of 85%. Which means that for the purposes of our capacity, we are 100% capacity means that a classroom is being used at 21.25 students per classroom. So the exception of that is the dual language. So this is our elementary school capacity. I'll just touch on the highlights here. A lot of these are columns in the beginning here are from our inventory, which I showed previously. We have our district-wide programs, which were reserved. And then a big part of our exercise was to identify flex classrooms. So flex classrooms are rooms that are not used for K-6 instruction today, but could be used for grade 6 instruction if needed for increased enrollment or an enrollment bubble. So district-wide, we identified 7 flex classrooms. 6 of those are at Chapel, and 1 of those is at Franklin. We anticipate that at Chapel, some of those users of the large spaces, we had some that were just used as small group rooms or used 1 day a week for a part-time staff person. Other rooms could be gained by simply subdividing a full-size classroom that's used by 1 staff person today for a support service. And that leads us then to our full-size classrooms that we use for the capacity. And then we multiplied that by our loading level of 25, except in Second Hill Lane dual language classrooms, and then applied the efficiency factor of 85%, getting to our capacity at each building. Comparing that to our October 1st enrollment, you can see that we do have great variability from school to school. Right now, district-wide, we're at just under 90% utilization, which is a very efficient operation. You have really close to ideal class sizes and as a system, but what we see is there's a lot of variability from building to building. We have several schools that are over 90%. So Eli Whitney, Nichols, Second Hill Lane, Johnson House, and Wilcoxon, and Nichols, excuse me. And once you get over 90%, that's when you start to any given grade, you may see an enrollment bubble, you may be struggling to maintain class sizes and having efficient flex room in your building should you have an enrollment bubble or enrollment growth year over year. We have Chapel, which is utilized at about 63% this year, the lowest of any building, and Franklin at 84%, largely due to the 1 flex classroom it has, and Lordship at 83%, which is more of a function of some of the class sizes there, since it is a smaller school. There is some available seats in some classes. So if we compare our capacity to our projected enrollment, we can look at projected utilization over the next decade. I will caveat by saying we have the greatest confidence in our first 5 projected years because we're using known data. So we're using known birth data, and for some grades, for our enrollment projection 5 years out, some of those students are currently in seats today. So we always like to look at the first 5 years as kind of our our most confident way of drawing conclusions. But it's similar to what we showed on the previous slide, where Chapel being the most underutilized school at averaging 66%, Eli Whitney, Johnson House, and Wilcoxon approaching 100%, and then several buildings in the high 80s, which is efficient, and then Lordship, as its enrollment is projected to decrease, that's utilization is projected to drop to just under 70%. We also look at this from a seat surplus and deficit standpoint. It's normal for school systems to have small seat surpluses in each of your buildings because you're never going to hit perfect class sizes in a neighborhood-based school system. So it is perfectly normal to see small numbers in the teens, 20s, or even 30s, which would just represent 1 to 2 available seats in all of your existing classrooms. And for the most part, that's where your current buildings are. Any available space you have, with the exception of at Franklin and Chapel, is headroom within existing classrooms. It's not physical classrooms that can be gained. But you can see Chapel is far and away the school with the greatest amount of seats, averaging about 150 per year over the next 5 years. As we get into the later years of the projections, we actually see Johnson House and Wilcoxon operate at a seat deficit. So some of our key findings, we have, overall, our district-wide utilization is, really in a good sweet spot. Being in the mid to high 80s or low 90s system-wide is efficient use of space. But what we see is that space is unevenly distributed across your buildings. Operating your neighborhood-based systems, the Chapel attendance zone is undersized. So that's really the key driver there. Historically, in the not too distant past, that building had over 500 students in it. And it's just simply based on the geography, where your schools are, and the lower population density around Chapel, that attendance zone is undersized given the size of the building. Another finding is that Lordship has a big challenge in operating with a larger attendance zone simply because it does not have enough classrooms to function as a 2-section per grade school. You would have to move programs, you would have to, I'm not sure if they'd even have enough small spaces for all their support services to operate as a full 2-section per grade school. And what that means is that we need to have a smaller attendance zone, and the administrative policies of placing students into Lordship are needed in order to make sure that we have some classes with 1 section and some classes with 2 sections. If we were to enlarge the Lordship attendance zone so that it was a 2-section per grade school, we're not confident that you'd be able to operate that facility at the same level of your other facilities in terms of providing adequate support spaces, et cetera. So certainly the size of that building is a challenge given the 7 grades that you're fitting into your buildings. And then conversely, the Johnson House attendance zone is too large for the school's capacity. So we have over 760 students living in the Johnson House attendance zone. A decent number of those students participate in the dual language program at Second Hill Lane. We also have a decent number of administrative placements into Lordship, but we also have students who live in the Johnson House attendance zone being administratively placed into other elementary buildings, which can exacerbate some of the enrollment pressures that they're feeling, especially if they're a school that's at 90 to 100% utilization. That's just our observations. For the middle school, we went through a similar exercise to identify an educational program, looking at programs that need full-size classrooms. And at the middle school level, there's great parity between your 2 buildings. Both middle schools today operate at a 2.5 team per grade model. So 5 total teams in each building. So that's 5 teachers in the 4 subjects, and I believe 4 in world language. And then we have identical spaces for our art, music, tech, and health programs. And unlike the elementary schools, we have a lot more purpose-built spaces at the middle school level. So, our band room or our tech lab are not spaces that we can easily convert into another use without some level of investment. We do have some disparity in the number of spaces that are used for various support services, with flood having a greater number of full-size spaces used for resource and district-wide programs. We went through a similar exercise where we used loading levels. We used an effective class size of 28 students per classroom at the middle school level, which balances your contractual loading level with, the variation that you'll get in an individual classroom just based on student choice for electives. Walking through the buildings, it looked like many of the classrooms averaged about 25 seats. The 28 students is slightly higher than how those buildings are being operated today. We reserved 2 classrooms at flood for the steps in the sales program. But unlike the elementary schools where the students are in their classrooms for the day, the middle school capacity is always based more on scheduling. And so what we did is the middle school capacity takes all of our core subjects, all of our specialists, that's our art, music, tech ed, and health, multiplies that by 28 students per classroom, and then applies an efficiency factor of 71%, which is essentially each classroom being used for 5 out of 7 periods per day. So looking at our middle school capacity, we did a similar exercise where we looked for flex classrooms that could be repurposed for grade level instruction. So at flood, we identified 5 flex classrooms. We have 2 larger classrooms that are subdividable. I believe they were used during COVID to maintain some smaller class sizes there. We have some underutilized spaces currently used for testing and a book room, and then 1 classroom used for storage, so 5 total rooms. And then at Worcester, which is a physically smaller building, we had fewer flex spaces, so they have a kind of a multi-purpose room that serves, kind of as a touchdown space for many different staff, and then condensing some of the support services, we anticipate gaining 1 space. So if we look at our utilization, flood, we're at 64% this year, Worcester at 80%, overall utilization at about 72%. So one thing to note when we did walk through flood is an interesting building. The subdividable classrooms at flood, while we did count them as full size, would be on the smaller side, about 700 square feet each. So below the typical middle school classroom size. So that would just be a consideration if those rooms were used going forward. You're probably gonna, it's probably gonna be challenging to fit 28 students into some of those smaller spaces. So we did the same exercise where we compared enrollment projections to our capacity. And looking at our first 5 years, we're looking at our district-wide utilization to decrease from 72% to about 70%, with flood decreasing to 62% and Worcester decreasing to 79%. And we did the same exercise running seat surplus and deficit for each of the buildings, and overall we have an average seat surplus of about 420 to 450 students over the next 5 years or so, and with flood having more seats than Worcester. So one of the questions that came up at our last meeting was how to explore moving 6th grade up to the middle schools. So we felt like we could do this as kind of a high-level analysis before we get sharpen our pencils and start looking at some of the changes to the attendance zones. So in this hypothetical, we moved 6th grade up to see if we had enough seats system-wide. And here you can see we're operating at a deficit. So if we used all of those flex rooms and increased our class sizes to 28, we would be over capacity system-wide with a deficit of about 54 seats. We would be closer to running at the max capacity, but still over the 100%. And seats, we thought was a good starting point, but it does overstate feasibility just because of the differences in educational models. So available seats in the 7th and 8th grade classroom can't be used by 6th graders under your current educational model because 6th graders would have the home rule model. And so our next step was to do a little bit more of a detailed analysis of the physical classroom spaces. And so we assumed that they would need their own dedicated classrooms. They wouldn't be able to use the available seats in your core instructional rooms, so your math, your science, your ELA, social studies, and world language. And as I mentioned earlier, we have only 5 flex rooms at Flood and 2 at Worcester that could hypothetically support 6th grade. So we did a classroom level analysis to see how many classrooms would 6th grade need, and we used different loading levels. We used 22 as more of an ideal loading level. District-wide, you would need 23 classrooms between the 2 middle schools, and perhaps more once you divide them in 2 and you lose some efficiency. If we use our max class size of 27, we need on average about 19 per year, and that compares to the 7 available classrooms in the middle schools today. So we feel like the existing middle school facilities don't have enough physical classroom space to support the 6th through 8th grade configuration. So our middle school key findings, we noted the imbalanced feeder pattern earlier, where we're starting to see a disparity between Flood and Bunnell being on the smaller side compared to larger Worcester and Stratford High. And again, largely due to the feeder pattern, where under the ideal, a lot of districts like to have more of a 50-50 split of students between their middle and high schools. Right now, you're at about 45-55. And so as we go through our discussion tonight and our next step in our process, I think one of the questions for you is going to be, should that be one of our considerations, is to try to strive for more of a 50-50 split at the middle and high school level as we look at changes to the elementary attendance zones. And just to, again, recap some of our key findings, middle school utilization is at 72% today, decreasing to 70%, 68%, so much lower than your elementary schools. But when we look at physical classrooms, they just don't have enough physical space to support 6th grade. And I know you have had some discussions about criteria, and so I think one of the goals tonight is for us to understand where you're at as a committee and as a board, to understand what you're trying to accomplish out of this process, and that's really going to set the guide rails for us as we start looking at options. We really need to understand, what are you striving to achieve as part of this process? And typically, what we always recommend is that it comes down to 1 or 2 must-haves. What are 1 or 2 things that we're really trying to achieve? And then we have, we could have a longer list of nice-to-haves. Having done this for almost 10 years, there's always going to be trade-offs, and if we can kind of bifurcate, what's really required versus what's nice to have, it makes our job easier. Once you start trying to accomplish, 3, 4, 5 things simultaneously, it's very difficult or impossible to find a solution that meets all of them. So I'm happy to answer any questions that folks may have, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, maybe after we get through Q&A on your criteria and how we should best move forward with the next phase of our work.
Does anybody have any questions?
Obviously, it's not a good idea to move to 6th grade. You see that there. So we should leave 6th grade where it is in the elementary school, as far as I can see what they're showing us here.
Based on our current
Well, it says
structure.
5 years or to 10 years, it still doesn't show us enough room to move the 6th grade to the middle schools. So that, I think, that's the thing we should put the rest, my opinion, we should put that to rest there and look at the other objectives that we have to try to balance these schools the way we want to. I think 6th grade, just personally, I think it's off the table right now, just from what I'm being told here.
Based upon the physical space.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. They don't have the space in any of the schools to do that. Move the 6th grade to the middle schools.
So just as a scenario, had you guys looked at, I mean, I'm sure you haven't gotten there yet, but
if we had moved the 6th grade up to the 7th and 8th model, would that free up enough space to consolidate the elementary schools and create a 3rd middle school?
So that's not something we've looked at yet. So that's again something where we're waiting for guidance from you all as a board, especially things that involve policy, educational models. We defer to you all and kind of the consensus of the group of, you know, what things should we look at, what things are off the table.
Can I make a suggestion, Mike?
Yeah.
You know, my brain and my thoughts work like you guys could really be thinking about a slow transition to what you really want to get to. Okay, there may be something you might want to suggest for SLAM that says we'd like to have better utilization of our buildings in general, so we want to look at our lines in elementary schools so that we're not shifting with this decrease in Flood and Bunnell and the increase in Stratford High and Worcester, so that we are feeding things better as our primary focus for something we want to put into place, say, next year. But if we are looking at 6th grade, then that could be a longer term project we work towards. So that could be, you know, maybe we do want them to look at what it would look like for us to take up another one of the elementary schools and make a 3rd middle school, and can we distribute the rest of the children? And that might be something we can't do for a year or 2, but it could be something that we are looking at planning to do. So they could take a couple priorities, and it doesn't mean we have to go and do it right away. It just means that, you know, what do we want as a district? So when I look at this, I think number 1 priority is better utilization of our buildings, so that we're not having one building being used at 63% and the rest of the other buildings being used at 90%. And I think a better distribution, so we can have a better racial distribution for our students, might be for us to look at those lines. And then a 3rd priority might be for us to talk about what we need for building renovations, either adding classrooms to our middle schools or taking over another building to possibly have a different shift to meet the desire of our staff to better meet the academic and emotional needs of our kids. Does that make sense?
Yeah, as long as we try to balance all the schools
Right.
equally, because otherwise, looking at this lordship, my God, I don't even know we have that building open.
Yeah.
The way you see the population there, so I think if your program's right, if you want to spread it out a little bit, but I think we have to balance the schools first before we move on to.
To step second, 2 or 3. So it might.
Exactly right, we have, from what we've seen here.
Are we gonna get a copy of this? So I wrote down the numbers as we went, but I just wanna make sure I have a copy to look it over.
I'm assuming you have paper copies you can get forwarded to the board, to the committee?
We actually do have the electronic copies.
Yeah, we'll get them printed for you.
Okay.
Okay.
Another thing I noticed in here, we were talking in the beginning about, he had a slide up there about the town development over the next few years. Out of that whole list, 477 of the new buildings going in were all in Johnson's district. So that's gonna be a big influx if they have children that are gonna continue to feed into that school. So I think that we definitely need to consider redistricting out, because if everyone's gonna be feeding in, we're adding another 477 houses in that one area, that's a large addition that's gonna come out of it.
And I think that's what he was saying, too, is that area is too big.
So of that 477 units, I know, I recognize some of them, I think a number of them are 2-bedroom projected, those projected development, those are 2-bedroom apartments or condos, is that correct?
We got the unit breakdowns for some of them. I believe there were some that had 2 bedrooms. A lot of the developments had a large number of studio and 1-bedroom apartments as well.
Okay, so typically, just, you know, real estate, typically 2 bedrooms, 1-bedroom studio do not produce school children, or increase the number of school children in a district.
It's not necessarily guaranteed, though. I live in a 2-bedroom house myself, and I have 2 children that go to the school, so it's not always guaranteed that way. Also, it's a very transient community as it is, so rentals, people are moving in and out consistently, so it's very hard to track how many students would be moving in and out of that transient population, so.
Yeah, no, yeah, but I mean, historically, like Avalon Bay and the old Keating Ford, I mean, the number of students that came from those developments were very minimal, and if you look at other towns like Shelton
who have a large number of apartments, condos, typically, not guaranteed, but typically I think, but to your point, that there, a lot of that development is in that Johnson area.
Other things is, I know I came to the last meeting, but could we get a copy of what the results were from the last study that you had sent out, to the town, you had sent out the priority list?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because on there, I know that part of it was about, priorities were about racial equity and making sure that we keep neighborhood schools. From what you just presented, it seemed like there was only 2 neighborhood schools currently functioning as neighborhood schools. So I don't know if we're gonna move towards that model more, and if we do, how are we gonna make that work when some of our neighborhoods aren't populated by children?
So, and is that true that the way I kind of saw it, and I could be wrong, but the majority of the districts, maybe outside of Lordship, were functioning as neighborhood schools? The larger majority were neighborhood kids, or is that incorrect?
Yeah, let me get back to that slide. So, Lordship and Second Hill Lane were the 2 buildings that had the lowest share of students who lived in the attendance zone. So 55% at Second Hill Lane, 42% at Lordship. Your other buildings are between 86 and 90 and 99% in Johnson House. So you do have, these are largely neighborhood based, but you still do have a not insignificant number of students who live outside the attendance zone attending some of their other neighborhoods.
But Second Hill Lane, that number is largely driven by the dual language program, correct? So that's an intended non-neighborhood type program. So it's functioning. I mean, if you took that out, if you took those students out of the population, I think that neighborhood school number would go up significantly. If you got 20 kids per class, you got 40 per grade times 6 is 240. You got 597 in the school, so you're looking at 350 kids that are neighborhood schools. So that would, that's almost I would bet about a 30-40% swing in that. In the intended neighborhood usage.
And Mike, the same thing with Lordship, it has the total enrollment of 176 and 101 of outside that district.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah. Those are the 2 anomalies as far as neighborhood schools, I think. But
And Chapel a little bit,
Yeah,
because
Chapel has
the
the
difference, Pat, correct me if I'm wrong, but the difference with Chapel, they do have a lot of students in the neighborhood that are going there, but we're not using Chapel to its capacity. So because we're using Chapel at a low capacity, I think your capacity study for Chapel, it was down in the 60s for utilization. So it's to me, the challenge with having a model of neighborhood schools is that our neighborhoods don't match the size of the elementary school in their neighborhood. So because our buildings don't fit it, it's a tough model for us. Just like it would be tough for us to do sister schools. That's another elementary model that's tough for Stratford because our sister schools don't match up size-wise. So that's where, this awesome group of people has to get creative in their thinking so that we can make sure we are utilizing our schools to their capacities.
I mean, so for me, and I think this was similar to what that survey did, the last survey that did. I think 2 of the main things were balancing the lines, the enrollment in schools, when we have schools like Chapel and Lordship that are somewhat underutilized in Franklin, and then you have schools like Johnson and Second Hill Lane, I think, that are a little more over. So to me, it would be, and you guys give your opinion after it, but to me, it would be balancing those lines so there's even distribution within the school districts, and then creating the racial balance that's required by state. I think those are the two main points of this, and that's, I think, why we originally started this process, was to create those 2, and the 6th grade came up as if there's a way to get there, and if it's a better model educationally, the next question would be, how do we get there? But, for now, I think the short term, for me, my suggestion would be balance those lines so each school has equal utilization, and then we create the racial balance that's required by state. state law.
So,
Good, Mr. Lemon.
Pat, quick question. Where are you guys accounting for the private school and Catholic school population in here? Because don't we by state law have to maintain seats available for them in case they come back?
So, what our projections assume is that recent levels of private, parochial, other public school enrollment will continue at current levels. So they're kind of factored into the model. It's more of a status quo. They're not in the model per se, but we're assuming that we're not going to see a big influx, for example, of students from a private or parochial school, or vice versa, a big exodus. We're assuming kind of continuation of recent trends.
Did you have a quick comment, Mr. Bunny? Just a quick comment.
No, hi,
No, not me.
I'm Beth Ponte, I'm a demographer, and I just wanted to ask a few kind of nerdy questions, but they're important. Your projections are based on the medium scenario. What happens if we go too high? And I didn't get to grasp the difference in the assumptions between the low, medium, and high. And how much uncertainty is there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So our assumptions are largely driven by the size of the incoming kindergarten classes and the level of in-migration. So the medium is historically, we're having done this for almost 10 years, most districts over a 10-year period are about average. But in any given year, you may trend high or you may trend low based on, larger economic trends. So for example, in 2021, when you had a lot of in-migration into the community, we were probably trending, toward the high. But this past year, we saw migration decrease, so we're trending, a little bit below the median most likely. But if you kind of average that out, the median trajectory, at least for long-range planning, from our experience, is the best number to go by. But to your point, it's always good to have the different what-if scenarios and kind of have contingency plans. So I think the exercise we did for the 6th grade is a perfect example of, while we know it doesn't work under the medium, if let's say it was closer to being feasible under the medium, then we could say, well, if we trend towards the high, then that's going to hurt the feasibility, and that kind of impacts your decision making. So I think it comes down to if an approach that you're leaning towards is marginally feasible under the medium, the high and the low are kind of good tools for us to look at to say, well, if we trend high, will it work, or it won't.
Anybody in the back have any questions? No? I thought I heard someone want to. Okay, Mr.
Hey, I just wanted to, Pat, could you please go to the slide where you recommended for the middle schools, the rebalancing? Because the 6th grade does not follow the educational model, just want to see that slide.
This one?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so I think a perfect example would be, right now Chapel is underutilized, and Chapel is in the Flood and Bunnell High School feeder. So if you increase the enrollment at Chapel and presumably take some students out of the Worcester Stratford High School feeder, that change could then help you balance at the elementary, but also create the balance at the middle and high school. So certainly something we'll have some numbers to report to you on as we start running through different options.
Any other questions or?
I just want to make sure I think what I'm hearing is that this group feels though priority number one is re-looking at our lines so that we have a better usage percentage for our elementary schools to then feed our high schools and middle schools more adequately. Then we're going to look at our racial balance. Those would be your top 2 priorities.
Is there anybody here who disagrees with that or has other thoughts?
Well, the only wrinkle I would put into that is, Pat, at what point do you start looking at transportation? Because in our prior model, before we went to we were in non-neighborhood schools, there was a fair amount of busing that happened. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, is there a potential hybrid of some redistricting and some busing, so that it doesn't look like we basically turn the town into a puzzle and meet a new puzzle out of the redistricting?
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. So I think that when we do redistricting processes, we'll work with your transportation department once we kind of get a short list of options for them to do their analysis and let us know if there's any changes to busing and any potential increase in busing costs. I think another thing, to your point, that will be something that we look at is we want to try to achieve, balanced utilization, and we're gonna come with a couple of different approaches to do that. We might do ones that preserve neighborhoods to the greatest extent we can. Then we may show you ones that is a deviation from that, and both of those may impact your overarching goals differently. And so that kind of comes into the decision-making process. So I think we're going to look at a range of options, and then it's going to be up to you as a committee and board to kind of weigh the pros and cons of those and decide on the right direction.
Yeah,
No, good, thank you. Good, Mike.
so to Mr. Llewellyn's point, I think, and the way kind of you laid it out, I almost kind of see like Eli Whitney and Second Hill Lane moving some students over towards Chapel. Not exactly, this is but a simplified version, and Franklin and Lordship maybe moving some students, or Johnson moving some students over to Franklin and Lordship. It's a simplified version of it, but it doesn't seem like there needs to be major changes to accomplish it. It's just more some tweaking of the lines as opposed to redrawing, massively redrawing the whole map. Is that kind of close to what?
Yeah, I think we would defer to the board, and I know I saw one of your prior meetings you discussed minimizing disruption as one of your criteria. So that'll certainly be something that we strive to achieve when we're working through our options.
Mike, just like everything you talk about redistricting the lines, we could do that once we come up with a pattern, if we will, to redistrict is based on lines, if you will, and then we're going to have to racially balance it to make sure we stay within the state regulations.
Yep.
And we can look at our busing issue, and just put that part of our criteria.
Yep.
But first of all, I think we got to get to redistricting and see where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
Once we do that, then we can go make sure we're racially balanced in the state law, and then look at the transportation part of that. So we got to I think start with that first.
Yeah. So I think so. So that, but to that point, and I'm just saying not that's where we're going to end up, but it seems like if we
Put that on our
Yeah.
criteria, then I think we can get to it.
Yeah, but I think it can be done, but just to make, it seems like minor tweaking is more in line than major withdrawing. And that would maintain our neighborhood schools and create the least disruption, moving a few kids here and here instead of, scrapping the whole thing. So, yeah. And then I would love to see, how we create a sixth grade model, a 6 through 8 model. I mean, if it is a better educational model, why, I think it would behoove us, I think would be the word, to not look at that.
Well, I think what they showed you, maybe that could be down the road a little bit.
Yeah,
for us.
absolutely.
We got to stay with try to redistrict now with the lines,
Absolutely.
balance it racially and balance it transportation-wise. Then once we see where we're at and everything's going good, then maybe we can look at the sixth grade. Right now, I don't think sixth grade should be put into our.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you, and it's a long-term process to get to there. We've talked about it in our school space and our capital improvement plans, and that's one of the reasons why I would have Mr. Llewellyn on this committee, because he's involved with building needs and is familiar with a lot of that stuff, so he'll give us some good insight as we move forward. But long-term, down the road. But
down the road, exactly. Not right now.
But right now, I think those are our two main priorities: is redrawing the lines to get utilization, a better utilization of all the schools, and then creating the racial balance that we
in the transportation
we need, and then how that impacts our transportation costs and issues.
Pat, do you feel like that gives you the direction you need?
I think so, yeah. So we'll just kind of share our notes and make sure that we got everything documented properly, and then we we can move on to the next phase of our work.
Any more questions, comments before we let them go?
No, I agree with you, that the 6 to 8 model, I think, is something down the road that deserves more research and thought, and I'd like to hear some of the 73% on why they feel it's more effective, and look at other towns and see how it's more effective.
All right, well, that's, I guess, it for Pat.
Thanks, Pat.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank you, everybody.
We appreciate you.
All right, so at least we have a start, we have a direction, they've got some guidance, they can keep going with what they're doing. Capital improvement plan, is that, Mr. Ruggiero, is that you wanna pick up on that?
Sure. So, this was the capital improvement plan that we've been working on with the principals at the schools. And so this is what we came up with, on what we feel we wanted to keep in. Everybody has ideas of what they want, and we kind of looked at it as what was best for the schools and what we wanted to keep and put in there. So, you want me to just start at the top and work our way down?
Sure.
So, district-wide, all the schools, a lot of the schools were getting the bottle fill stations that they were either having functions to raise money. Father's Fund. We put in 10,000 a year projected out to 29 that we can get. Fill
Present you're
stations.
buying.
Sorry, Rich.
Put fill stations in the schools to kind of help them out. And over that time, we can
Thanks.
pretty much outfit the schools with them. That was one of ours.
Rich, quick question, who would do the installation of
The
those?
town.
So then doesn't that in effect become more of an equipment purchase, in that if 10 of them got purchased, you would then be able to put them into the schools as the schools were available, either on breaks or over the summer?
Correct.
So it wouldn't really be a contracted, go out to
No.
purchase, so to speak, it would more be an equipment, buy the
Equipment
units.
buy
and then install.
And then we install.
Thank
And
you.
actually, the town's been maintaining all filters too.
Excellent.
Again, upgrades to audio systems, PA systems. Some of them are getting old, tired, and we're repairing them a lot, so we figured we'd put in some monies into the budget that we can start getting them replaced and get all new ones. That goes along with all the master clocks. Some stuff that's district-wide that we have on here is owned by the town, so doors and hardware. The town will always put in X amount of dollars every year into the capital budget. Elevator replacements, same thing. General repairs, always gonna end up pretty much being the same amount of money that the town takes care of. Painting, and the town has been doing a lot of painting for us right now, and that's part of my district information for you guys afterwards. So, and they have a really great painting crew right now, and they also use an outside vendor that does a lot of painting. They did this room for us here. Playgrounds, some of the schools that we had, Soto for instance, the playground that was installed when that was built, doesn't really suit our needs anymore. We're kind of at that point now where the school's 10 years old that we could replace it without any issues with the state. The pricing I get for those comes directly from the town person that does all the installs, so that's where I got the pricing for all this, for all the playgrounds.
Can I ask a question about that? I'm sorry.
Sure.
Currently, Johnson uses the Soto playground because their playground isn't efficient for K through.
Right.
So how would that work out for those
So,
students? Could they move the playground from Soto over to Johnson? Is that a possibility?
So they didn't, Harold, when I talked with the principal, he didn't mention anything about not, like redoing the playground. What he wants to do is add, it's a soccer.
Yeah, I saw it on there,
right?
the Gaga ball. And
Yeah,
Yep.
that seems to be a
Yep.
big thing in all the schools,
Mm-hmm.
cause I brought it up. I said, do we wanna see about taking the one that you have here out? And
Yep.
so I'm not sure,
Yeah, because I know they bring the kids over to
They do.
Soto to use the playground,
Absolutely.
so, okay.
Utilizing, the changing of the Soto playground wouldn't not allow them to utilize the playground. It
Okay.
makes it more appropriate
Right.
for preschool and kindergarten kids,
Mhm.
because the current playground has a giant rock on it.
Mhm.
That's really meant for
That
older kids.
was, yeah, that was, I don't know how they agreed
Yep.
on what they were putting in at the time. There were kids of that age, 5 to 6 or 5 to 7, that was listed on there at the time, but
Mhm.
no longer, so that's
Yeah.
what we want to get rid of.
Yep.
And, you know, boiler replacements they've been going through, we're narrowing it down to just a couple left that town's gonna take care of, and we also wanna try to get the boiler replaced at AIP, at the old honey spot. Cause that one, those two are both way past their prime. And I know the town is working on it. HVAC upgrades, we actually did quite a bit of replacement of HVAC systems at Worcester and Wilcoxon, Johnson. There's been a lot of stuff upgrades that we put in, added stuff that wasn't there. Again, so every year we want to keep adding stuff in there. Sidewalks is another one. The town always gives us like the 50,000 a year. And they do quite a bit of sidewalks. The town's been doing a lot of them throughout the district. Resurfacing parking lots. This is something that comes up every year. And I know Chapel is on schedule to have that whole basketball area redone this spring. That'll all get ripped out. The asphalt that's in there now is coming out. And I know that one's getting done. That one's on the books to be done.
And Worcester was done a couple of years ago, that was a major project.
Yeah.
And then Benell, I think, is scheduled for this coming
It's
summer.
supposed to be. It was supposed to be last year.
And that
but
water,
I think they ran
that
out of
water
money.
thing, yeah,
So, but I was told that it's definitely getting done this,
yeah, and it needs it.
yeah, definitely.
So
But
Rich-
there's a lot of them that need it, you know?
Before we turn the page, just so that doesn't slip my mind, with regards to Vicky Soto's school, what are the chances that in the future the town's newest elementary school ceases to become a preschool?
Say that that's pretty slim with 125 kids on a waiting list to get into a preschool. So if anything, it's just gonna grow. You have, we have different mandates and a large influx, and as you can see, when they showed you the capacity study, they're already at almost 90% capacity to hold our preschoolers. As we continue to open preschool rooms to meet the need of your town, that's gonna take up the entire location.
And then should the development happen at Johnson House or in the Johnson district, as it looks like it may, that school would be positioned there to first pick up the preschoolers, and then we would figure out the rest of the dominoes as those kids work their way through. Okay.
And remember, preschool age change now too, so not only are you having a growing population of preschoolers, but now with the age change, starting after this year, waivers won't be allowed to be requested, and our preschools will go through that.
Sorry, Rich.
That's okay.
On to page 2.
So safety and security. We did quite a bit of upgrade of some of the schools with blue lights, cameras, that schools that didn't have many cameras, if any. So now a lot of the ones that we have in the district are getting old, so we wanted to put enough money in to replace, upkeep whatever, breaks, and also keep adding cameras to every school. So we know we have cameras that they can view inside and out. That's our goal. You'll see that there. Air quality, HVAC inspections. Again, this is something that's statewide. Coming in, we had a company come in and do a study in all our elementaries. This coming year, they'll be doing the high schools, the middle schools. So they come in, they do a study, tell us what the airflow is, all the capacities, that everything is running right. It's a mandated, so we have to do it. And we have all our elementaries done this summer and into the fall.
And they all
Yeah,
passed.
well, they did. But, so what it did, what it did was it forced some stuff to get done, so they could actually perform what they had to do.
Rich, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I remember from last year, Stratford High School, we we had a serious problem with the air conditioning and everything else in that building.
So,
We did not pay that bill yet.
no, no, it
And
hasn't.
where do we stand with the fixing this
Again,
problem?
that's in the town's hands, so it's not in my hands to fix.
And Al, if I could ask you for being a councilman now, because I don't blame the contractor, I blame the architect and the people that designed that system there, because it's not sufficient enough for everybody. Obviously, all you hear is complaints about that school, and we're spending all this millions and millions of dollars on the school, we gotta get it fixed
So
right.
I haven't been updated yet with the status of where we are with some of the, sort of legal maneuvering and legal questions that were being asked and answered. But I can tell you that Turner is moving forward with the financial reconciliation of the project and returning the last of the invoices and unused monies. And off the record, I take that as a sign that they must be comfortable that things are coming to a conclusion, that they would be comfortable enough to go ahead with final billing.
Okay, but,
So I don't know the answers to the questions, but based on the paperwork I'm seeing and how things are progressing,
so,
there's less and less questions. I just don't right now have all the answers.
I understand it, but I just wanna make sure that before we pay that final bill, and all those millions of dollars we spent on Stratford High School, that everything's up to 100%
No.
efficient.
No, absolutely. Going through building needs, we pushed off on signing off on the commissioning, we pushed off on final acceptances for
Okay,
as long as we
yeah,
possibly could.
I just wanna make sure that we get what we're paying for here.
Yep.
And we should not take anything less than that, for all this money we spend on that school. That it should be up and running right, and have the contractor sign off on that, or the architect, whoever's definitely the architect's responsible in the first place. Not the contractor, because they only put in what's designed on that, the print and everything else. So I think we need to make sure, I want to publicly say that we need to make sure that this is done right.
No, I agree.
Because all they do is keep changing motors, keep changing this, no, that's crazy. I've been in construction 48 years and been on many of these big jobs, ran on many of these big jobs, this is not right.
Yeah, I've never heard of compressors going dry and burning
Exactly.
out this
Well,
fast.
It's just ludicrous.
So, Alan, does that suggest that there's going to be resolution action to the issue as it may be?
There is,
Okay,
yeah.
okay, I just want to make sure, thank you.
Now, did we get any of the HVAC money from the state? That was millions of dollars, they said were out there for grants, I think. Do you know if we applied for those?
I think that's some of the boiler work that's been going on.
Like
We
the
did pay
chiller-
them,
Yeah,
yeah.
the boilers and chillers that flooded, those all came from,
Yeah.
from the bridge, yeah. All right?
Does the state have anything, if we have money in the state on this high school here, do they oversee to make sure everything's the way it's supposed to be?
Yes.
Okay, so it's on the state and on us as a town?
Absolutely.
Okay,
It's already in the town's hands.
okay, I understand that, Rich, I just wanna make sure, because that's all you have heard since this school opened up, everything's not sufficient enough. And we're spending all this kind of money, gotta make sure it's right, that's all I'm asking. Okay,
I'm gonna lump all of Benel's, I'm not gonna go through Benel individually, we all know that Benel needs some TLC. And we do have monies in that we put out, and you can read what Benel has and what they're actually looking for, Benel will definitely.
I might be jumping the gun a little bit from the town side, but it's already in the queue for building needs. I think there's 3 or 4 significant projects that are in design and construction for this summer and next summer. And then there's another batch of projects behind these 2 years coming up. Yeah, yeah.
I know the mayor has stated she's well aware of the Benel needs and there's plans for the work to be done. Yeah.
Let me get when the current budget books come out, let me get the updated capital improvement plan. I don't wanna give you projected stuff or information that's a year old when I'm weeks away from getting the current.
And I'll just add that we do talk with Renee often as we're putting this together. And we did put the more expensive items out for a couple of years because we have been asked by the town to try to keep our requests around 4 to, not quite 5 million each year. But Benel obviously is something that I know they have seriously considered doing renovations here. So to Rich's point, that is something that we are hoping will get done
Oh,
sooner rather than later.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
And and to Mr. Llewellyn's point as well, the mayor and her staff are all aware of the needs at Vanel, and there's some things in the works that we'll probably hear more about soon, but they're aware of this. And we had talked, and you know, my discussion was that the outside of the building is premium. You know, if the outside of the building fails, then the inside gets destroyed, so let's at the very least make sure the outside is secure, you know, waterproof, energy efficient, the windows are rolled, you know, there's a number of things there, so let's take care.
Especially when you're driving in the parking lot, your car falls in a hole that's bigger than the car.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm not a young kid anymore, but I remember being in high school, don't want to hit those potholes like they're doing over there, so.
Yeah.
It's-
So, but there, you know, and again, it's a
That's what
process,
we
we
need.
just, the town is still, I think the town is still footing the bill for some of this Stratford High, the interest or whatever it was, so they're putting expenses into our schools, but it's a process, and,
I understand, I'm just saying, it's personal experience.
yeah,
I don't have to do it anymore, my granddaughters drive themselves now, but still, it's really, really bad to go over there.
The drainage was improved in the
Huh?
summer. The drainage was
Yes.
improved in
Yeah,
the
so,
summer.
yeah, because you driving and you couldn't bypass the floods and everything.
Yeah.
In regards to Benel, is there anything glaring that ultimately impacts the learning, though, that needs to be addressed?
Yeah, again, classrooms need to be remodeled. There's a lot of stuff happening now, we all know that, right? And whatever plan that the town comes up with and whoever's drawn it up, I'm sure they'll cover every bit of that that'll be in there. You did a good job before.
Flooring's beautiful. Oh, it is, it's tremendous.
now, are you at Vanel, or, okay, so,
So,
What's your
yeah, we need
opinion?
a lot.
what's your opinion?
We need a lot. I mean, starting with windows and HVAC, windows are, in need. I think they're original.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, AC,
Hmm?
you know, a lot
The
of
whole
schools.
infrastructure needs to be updated,
Hmm.
there's no doubt.
Yeah,
That means the windows are only about 64 years old.
Yeah, my mother was in there.
they're just getting broken in.
Now, Johnson got done, or they're gonna get done? They were,
Not yet, but they're gonna.
they're done next summer, I think, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Johnson's looking good.
And they got all new floors too.
So, again, you know, each individual school, flood has a fair amount of stuff, and again, flood, we know, is kind of down across all the schools. Franklin School, for how old it is, doesn't have too many problems. It's 100 years old, it's over 100 years old. It's probably one of the nicest schools.
New roof, windows have been done, all brick exterior, not a lot can go wrong.
Yeah.
And so it looks like you've got some work done, moving back to the back pages, on well, it says transportation district wide, are those just, equipment purchases, or?
Yes. So we're looking to, where are we here?
Page 5, Mike?
Oh, yeah.
I see.
Yeah, so we're looking to upgrade.
Oh,
Let me go back. The student transportation that we have for all our vehicles, we need to upgrade those. We get a lot of miles on them. Pretty much they reach over 100,000 miles. It's time to start looking at new ones and replacing them. Without a doubt.
Now, Rich, just to throw this out there, only because I know some of the people in this room were part of the presentation, but on vehicles such as this, is this where we would look to start going the EV route when we make the decision to go? I mean, I'm just thinking,
Yeah.
getting 30 or 40 full-size buses in EV mode is, I don't think, ever gonna be an even remote possibility. It would more be these smaller service vehicles.
We haven't really thought about it yet. I mean,
It may be
It's
too
come
soon,
up
I
in
just wanna put it out there
conversation,
and start talking, because we could be
absolutely.
one legislative session in Hartford away from being forced to do something.
Sure. It's possible.
So how many of these vehicles are there in the Board of Ed's fleet?
Well, we have, the yellow school bus, right, the short one, Trinity as we call it. And then we have,
You know what, like,
six of the other, Tahoes. We actually purchased a van this year, like a 10-passenger, 8-passenger van.
so if these
Yeah.
purchases were to happen in the next 2 or 3 years as you're looking for,
Correct.
then when the next wave happens is when you could start nibbling at electric vehicles.
Yeah.
Good
Okay.
point.
I just wanted to point out too, on this page, there is a purchase of 2 additional vehicles, and that's for us to help transport our kids for programs, especially with our addition of a large amount of students heading to Strive. And remember, our Strive students go work in the community and need that transportation, and our AIP students that we are transporting over there. So that's why you're seeing a purchase of 2 additional vehicles in the second one down, and that is just to meet our needs to be able to get our students to and from where they need to get to.
And that's why that's showing as a 2024,
Yes.
2025,
Yes.
whereas the other 2 are kind of pushed out and one at
Yes.
a time.
Yeah.
And we do have a significant increase in homeless students that we are also transporting. We have
Yes.
drivers going out to, I don't know,
West
Greenwich
Haven.
or Norwalk or West
Could go to
Haven.
Norway, can go anywhere.
We've consistently in the past 2 years been over 30 students that we need to transport under McKinney-Vento. And in addition to that, we have our AIP program, and in addition to that, Strive has now just almost doubled in size. So those are the programs that really utilize our vehicles, and we don't have enough vehicles or drivers to meet those needs right now.
And Strive, just so everybody knows, is,
Our 223 program.
yeah,
Is that the program that's at HubSpot?
That's the program that is at Birdseye Strive.
Okay.
AIP is at HoneySpot.
Okay.
So both are programs, but our Strive students are our students that work at PEZ in Burlington and do the community garden, and so they have to be able, that's what they do. It's their transition program after they finish
Okay.
high school until
Okay.
they're 23. And so the transportation's really required.
and the state's mandated we hold them for another year.
It is, yeah. So now we hold them through their 22nd birthday, so they can be, approaching their 23rd birthday when they're done, being serviced by the Stratford Public Schools. So our numbers are growing. Like there's already 29 students there, and we're gonna have an additional 11 students next year. And the 29 that are there are not leaving. So we need some more vehicles.
Try them up. Well, while we're on this page, then I'll, custodial equipment. Our stuff's getting old, so every now we're gonna add in on the capital, so we can actually get stuff replaced. A lot of the big schools that are now, their equipment is daily,
A lot of mileage.
a lot of years.
And so, I notice we have the football field, the scoreboard. I know we just did lighting and, new turf fields. That wasn't part of the process, huh? No? Okay.
Actually, they're really having a problem with the current scoreboard, and they're just getting, it's being pieced together for the remainder of this year, so we're really hopeful that that's something that can get moved forward and supported.
This says at the bottom, created 11/1/23. Is that something you guys just got started? I know it's a 5-year plan.
Yeah.
Is this an adjusted?
It is.
Okay.
We actually basically start from scratch. Rich goes out and meets with all the principals. We have them do their own listing in October. That's when the whole process begins. Then Rich sits with them, goes over all the items, and works with them to get pricing. You work with the town, of course. And then we start to develop it. We'll look at the previous years to
Right.
see what needs to move forward or what was accomplished based on the funding that was made available from the town.
And has this list been presented to the town so that there's not overlap, there's not shared services or redundancies, whatever it may be?
Our process has normally been to come to plant planning and get it approved by the board before it goes to the town, but we have shared it with Renee in the past, and I speak of Renee Sarah, our public works director, because she usually takes the lead on the capital, but this has not yet gone to her.
Okay, and what's our time frame?
The town in the past has asked if possible, if we could get it to them to coincide with the budget season, but last year, we were told that it was okay if we got it to them by, the end of March or beginning of April.
Yeah, because I'm not gonna, we had asked this before, and there's a lot of information here, but I don't even wanna bring this to it. We can discuss it tonight, but I wanna give everybody time to review it, have some conversations, so we can, make an intelligent conclusion, and if we need to see adjustments as a committee, or recommendations, we'll have some time to do that, and so if we do send it to the board, our suggestion comes with some thought in it, not just we need to get it done yesterday, so let's push it up.
And our notations on here are simply for our own internal, because we've reviewed it, as you can see, numerous times. We tweak it, we get updated information, and we identify additional needs, so it has been changed a couple of times just internally before it's even presented to you.
And speaking of the scoreboard, I just want to mention two things. Stratford High softball uses DeLuca. It has a brand new scoreboard, compliments of the Breakettes. They paid for it themselves. And then Pendersfield, when they got the new scoreboard, I know there was some sponsorship involved by community organizations, so that could be kept in mind too for the Bunnell scoreboard. Just thinking Stratford Old Timers for one.
Yeah.
Sunil, I just want to point out, Rich, it was very helpful of you noting which of the some of the amounts that were annual, programmatic amounts that are put in every year. And I just want you guys to know that outside of that, if there's any kind of like a critical need, like specifically with a playground, say a playground, became 50% unusable because of a brutal winter, what would happen is that playground would kind of be added to what goes into the equipment plan or the improvement plan.
Yeah.
So it would be the regular school that was in line to get a new playground, and then the replacement for that would also come in. They wouldn't tell the school, no, you're not getting your playground because we have to fix one.
Chapel is exactly like that right now, so
Right.
Chad is gonna be replacing.
There's actually
that.
two that are happening this summer.
Right.
The regular one and the
Chapel.
chapel one, which was a use.
Yeah, and that
issue.
was something Chad had already put monies into.
Yep.
And we did get, grant money for, Franklin's, replacement of stuff, the whole pour and play and swings and stuff like that, so.
Yeah, as a general rule, I would try to avoid taking apart and relocating and putting playground equipment somewhere else.
No,
First of all, if any of us have ever had IKEA furniture, when you move, you put it back together, it's never quite the same. And the other thing too is that outside of school hours, nights, weekends, summers, really our school grounds are for our community. So to me, to take something away from a neighborhood and not have it be there would not be the right way to go.
yeah,
Programmatically, if you need to add to a playground, by all means, we need to accomplish
I
that.
don't think we're
But
looking to take anything away, we just wanna upgrade to what the school needs now. We can't use one
It's-
playroom.
it's
What's
not
that?
meeting all your programmatic needs.
What's that community grant?
Community development block grant,
Yeah,
CDBG.
so yeah, is there any availability to use any of those funds for school playgrounds?
I believe so.
And
Yeah, we did for Franklin.
They usually are applied through the town, and I'm not so sure that these playground purposes have been as welcomed as they have been in the past, as far as getting them approved, but that is something
Yeah, it was
definitely
tough.
that we can talk to the town about. Yeah, we struggled a little bit with this last
So I think the community development block grant is largely a part for community, or sections of town in need.
You're right.
Correct, and it's usually smaller ask, shovel-ready, sort of get them done in I think it's a 6 or 8 month program window, where you have to start, build, finish, send the bills to Washington for reimbursement.
Maybe we could talk to the town about, including, whether it's playgrounds or whatever it may be, or what we might have for school district needs that could fall into that grant.
Yeah, it definitely could. I mean, we have schools in those CDBG zones.
Yeah, so, just something to think about,
Yep.
for some of these. And even if it's an added element that we don't have in our capital improvement plan, but how do we meet the needs of the district, include the schools in it, so, anyway. Any other,
I have a question, sorry.
Sure.
Under here it says Eli Whitney is getting a playground fencing, or, is that required to have fencing around
No,
elementary school
It's just
playground?
something that the principals have been asking for.
Okay,
We did one in Lordship this year.
yes.
Yeah. A lot of them, when one gets it,
I know there was talk around
yeah,
another one, so, okay,
it actually keeps the kids right in line,
yeah.
you know.
Keeps them from wandering, I guess.
Yeah.
What's up, yeah.
They're all in there, you
Yeah.
know.
Oh, safety. I
Yeah,
think.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Call it a deterrent to the elopements.
Well, I know that, like, I keep bringing up
Runs.
Johnson, but that's one of the problems that they have there, is that there's no fencing around it, and it's a busier road, so it's a, you know, safety concern, so,
Absolutely it is.
yeah.
They just got a new foreign play
Mhm.
ground there, so.
Yeah, but there's like no way, so if they're playing with ball or anything, there's no fence or anything, so if they ran after that, they would be right in the road, so it'd be in Central, so.
Any other questions on the capital improvement? Rich, you wanna run us through the facilities update?
Yeah, so, our facilities update. Honey Spot, or Bird's Eye Street, we've been doing a lot of, work on gas lines in there. So I got a call today from the gas company. The old Honey Spot, the gas meter that's there is old and prehistoric, so that's getting changed this, Saturday. They're gonna go ahead and they're gonna take out the old meter that's on the outside of the building. Town will be there, shutting boilers down and get a brand new meter. That's a good thing. Again, Benel's painting, Worship's hallways are gonna be getting done, within probably maybe next week or weekend. They'll go through and they're gonna start painting all the hallways. And that's what, you know, through DD. Signage on the doors throughout the district, Carlos Gasco's been going through, working with one of the guys from the town, they made up all new reflective metal signs. We couldn't put the stick-ons, because now the doors are textured, so they made nice plates. They went through and they pretty much did everything that needed to get done in the district, all the ones that got replaced, so they won't break now. If you're out of school, you'll notice them, they'll stick right out at you. Again, blacktop at Chapels when you get done in the spring. The engineers were all out there to see what they had to do, and that'll all get ripped out, and the whole basketball will actually line it this time. So that actually looks like a basketball court there.
And that would be the similar type of court that's at Worcester and
Right.
Georgia?
It's just gonna be an asphalt, it's gonna be a blacktop.
Okay.
It won't be that type of material. What do we got? Chapel Playground, we talked that that's gonna get replaced this summer. School signs, I just talked with the sign design, last week. They sent out, call before you dig for Soto and AIP. So they're getting ready now to start putting new school signs up throughout the district. They kinda lucked out with the weather, so they're able to dig okay. They get all the new signs.
Is it all the new signs? It's all the, like, school sign, right?
School signs.
Yeah.
Yeah, down the front of the buildings.
Was it?
All of them.
All the schools.
Yeah.
Is it all? Okay. I remember we had voted on transferring some of those funds, I think. I didn't know if it was inclusive of every school, or it's just some of the
It
ones
is.
in disrepair.
It's all of them.
Okay, okay.
Because most of them are old and they're horrible. All the bushes are overgrown, that's all coming out now.
Okay.
And we'll put the new signs in, whatever the schools wanna do, anything around it, they'll be able to, going forward. Chapel Solar is now underway, you guys already started. Another couple of weeks, in February, we'll have our first construction meeting for Stratford High Solar. And then they'll be starting on that, to get all the material there and loaded up by the end of, this month. So, there's a lot of stuff going around. The main trap here in the building's like 95% complete. Everybody walked over and saw that, we just gotta wait for the tempered glass, for the transaction window. Cables are all in, floor, every the wall taken out, so we could, on your way out, if you wanna walk by, you can see what's going on. That's the top house I got right now.
So just, we did talk to the mayor as well and asked the potential of adding Honey Spot and the admin building to new roof and solar panels, and so she was gonna look into the potential of doing that, whether through the grants and whatever it is, so, but,
Roof would be good.
yeah, the roof,
I don't really have any leaks.
yeah. But it's, you know, they're both old and to put the solar panels if it's possible, but just,
I gotta go through and look up, I forgot when this roof was done. But it might still be okay.
yeah. But if we can put solar up on it and
Yeah.
add to the, while the grants are available, so.
Yeah.
So, anyway, any questions?
Has the second shift, Public Works helped attacking the big, long work orders?
They do,
They've got a great plumber now, they got great carpenters.
they do, they got a really good crew going on there right now. Definitely no complaints with the crew they got, especially when working at night. But you know, they're old buildings, the stuff is, tickets come in daily, and not just a couple. You know, it's leaks, it's pipes that are leaking, it's.
How about, is vandalism down? 'Cause I know that was an
Yes.
issue a couple years ago.
Vandalism is really down. You may get the occasional kid who wants to put some toilet paper in the toilet, but overall breaking all the dispensers, no. No, my guys know now that, enough now that if there's something going on, I need to know. And the principal needs to know. And I have,
Yeah,
let's
that's,
leave it at that.
that TikTok went away.
Yeah, till the next.
That's good.
Yeah.
Until tomorrow, now that you're.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, just changed it.
Plus two, we have all the vape sensors going into bathrooms, high school and middle school.
Really? Okay, awesome.
Yeah, most of it's down already.
I feel like the vandalism to some extent was almost like a post-COVID rage thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody got out of the bubble, back into the buildings. Let's see what we can break today.
All right, that leads to you, Alan.
So under building needs report, I believe we, building needs didn't have quorum in December and we didn't meet in January. But anything that's been needed to support the schools, the boiler programs, the indoor air quality programs, has either gone directly to the council or there've been discussions so that nothing's kind of fallen through the cracks, nothing's been delayed in terms of getting at any, bonded funds or grant funds. So yeah, we're scheduled to meet Monday night for building needs, just to give everybody a little bit of a preview. There will be some Turner High School related change orders. So far as I know, they're all credit amounts, getting them closer to reconciliation and 100% billed out and closed out. So we look forward to updating you on that next month. And I don't know if it's school related, but there's 3 or 4 other items that have gone through town purchasing that building needs is gonna act on Monday night. So I'll get back to you.
School related?
I don't know.
Okay.
I've just I didn't see the backup on some of them,
Okay.
so.
That's it?
Yeah, let me lead it to the, Benel High School and the parking lot conditions there. I'll be at Town Hall for Public Works Monday night as well, I'm actually chairing that committee, so I'll ask Renee kind of where Benel is in the queue in terms of being the school to get its parking lot redone.
Yeah, I thought they pushed it to the next summer, correct? Or this summer.
It's 2024.
Any questions for Mr. Llewellyn? Okay, so the next steps, obviously we have our capital improvement plan, so if we can all look through it and, do some research, ask some questions, whatever it may be, we'll talk about it a little more next month. I'll talk with the mayor, or whoever she suggests I talk with, and just make sure there's no redundancies. Maybe Mr. Llewellyn and I can, as councilman and the mayor can go over there. And then we'll bring any of that information back to you guys, and we can hopefully come to a conclusion on that. We'll wait to hear back from SLAM and see what their suggestions are. I think we've given them some good direction, and then we'll see what else comes up between now and next month. So I think that's about it. Our next meeting will be March 7th, 6:30. And if nobody has anything else, take a motion to adjourn. Mr. O'Brien, seconded by Mr. Carroll. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed unanimously. Thanks for coming.